Okay, we're now going to do a heel, but before we do the heel, we're going to set the automatic lifter, which is going to lift half of the needles up. And then I'm going to show you how to make the hash mark on your cylinder if you've got a new cylinder that hasn't got the hash marks, the red marks on them. So this is the knob that we're actually going to move and lift up, and we're going to bring that knob around to that position, and the little yellow pin lines up with the little yellow pin on the base of the machine. So just remembering in relation to the machine, that knob is now around out of our line of sight. You've got these two lined up. You lift the knob up and you'll find that a needle has started to come up, and just crank around a little bit. Now that's the mark to put your red mark. So in the front of that first needle that came up is the mark to put your red mark for your first hash mark. We come around and we carry on around until the little gold knob lines up with the little gold knob on the base. So that's our left hand gold knob. We then unscrew the lifter and drop it down and push the first needle down, because quite often they will catch in the path. Sometimes, depending on what cylinder you're using, you'll get a little jam up sometimes on the first needle, so you have to just manipulate that first needle. The first needle that's come up in the path is where you put your hash mark, and if you count round these needles you'll find that you're exactly half of the cylinder. So you've put this down, you've put that back down, so now the needle lift is not working. Round behind the first needle, just like we always do. Bring your yarn round behind the first needle. I always bring my first working needle up so that the yarn is actually behind two needles. We then bring the yarn up and thread it through the heel hook, which is just a matter of moving the heel hook forward and hooking the yarn over there. And that takes up the tension. We've threaded our yarn through the yarn guide. We now have to hang our heel hooks. These are heel hooks. This is a pair of heel hooks, and they also double as a latch up tool if you need to get right down into the machine to latch up any mistake. And a little bit of oil on those latches and they'll work quite freely. I like hanging a bootlace or a leather strap between two heel hooks and then hanging a weight off that. So that's my preferred method, and I'm going to use my trusty old pair because I'm very used to using them. I'm hanging them into the yarn, and what they've got to do is when that weight's pulled on there, it's pulling that heel, that front of that heel down, and so I'm hanging them about 6 rows down from the top of the fabric and about 6 rows in from the first non-working needle. And there's the heel hook sticking up there. So it's about 6 in and 6 down, doesn't have to be exact. And you need to hang a weight, and I would normally have a weight with a hook on it, but I haven't, so I'm going to do what I usually do and cheat and just hang one of my weights on and hold my heel hooks. It's a fairly new machine, so it's a little bit tight. Once again, round past the first needle and then lift the second needle up, and that stops you getting a hole in the fabric. Back we come. Right, you saw the yarn bunch up there. If that happens, just come back again, give it a little tap, and it'll usually fall into line, and around we go. Well, I'm doing a heel, and of course this is the only time you can go anti-clockwise on the machine, is because you've got needles out of work and you have come round past, you've brought your side cams round past those needles that are out of work. If all of a sudden the machine jams up on you, and it's not going to jam up on me, well, if I didn't want it to it would, but if it jams up on you, you may have knocked one of these needles down and it's just catching in the path. So always check all these needles that are out of work that they're actually right up in the right position, and that it's not them jamming your path, because that's usually what happens. It's very rarely the side cams. Also make sure that these needles are all down nice and firmly. Always make sure when you're cranking around that you hear the little tap and that drive wheel on the crank there, or that drive piece there, is hitting the camshell on the driving. I'm not sure what it's called on the driving part here, but that's got to hit there. If your camshell comes around any sooner, your needle won't knit and you'll drop a stitch. You can see that this stitch is just starting to ride up on the first needle that's going to knit again, and you can see the second one is doing the same. So I'm pulling that needle up because that's the one that's got to come up, but I'm also going to move my heel hook just in slightly and up a little bit so that keeps that tension on that heel. It's very, very important that you keep that tension on that heel. Now, when I first started knitting many years ago, I always used a third heel hook in the middle. And see, they're riding up on the front, so once again I need to just put my heel hooks down a little bit. This is really trial and error stuff, and very few people are going to make a heel first time. There's quite a lot of trial and error here. I did lift the needle up, didn't I? Yeah. And what we're doing is we're coming into, I should explain, you've put your hash marks on the two outsides, so you've divided the cylinder in half. You then need to divide the front half into thirds. So it's a 72 cylinder, 36 is half, 12, 3/12s are 36. So you're putting a hash mark on the 12th needle and the 12th needle each side. And you're knitting into that for the first half of your heel, and then you go back for the second half. I like hearing that little tap when I come around where that gearing's hitting the camshell. That nice little tap. And just move this in again. Which way am I going? This way. If it gets stiff, just give the crank a little bit of a tap. Make sure it knows who's boss. And we're on our last needle of the first half of the heel. Now, this is where we differ from other machines. Now we're coming back for the second half of the heel. If you want to, you can crank right round and you can bring your stitch down there. But on my machines, quite often, the yarn will pull that needle up and it will loop. So what I do when I'm knitting is I actually put it down there. Pretty well level with the knob that you've turned to lift your lifter up is where you push your needle down. Be forceful with it till the machine's worn in. Around we go. I didn't have the weight quite evenly distributed, and we went over and 1, 2, 3 stitches didn't knit. No problem at all. Just lift your needle up, bring the latch behind that yarn and knit that stitch off. Do the same for the other two, and it's not a big deal. Happens to everyone, even if they tell you it doesn't. We're on our last stitch, and I quite like to go round behind a needle. We're on that last stitch and we have to push our needles back down into work as we come around, making sure the latches are open. And I've found several that weren't. Just bring that yarn around a little bit, push all those needles down. Take the heel hook off, because if you carry on knitting round now, you're going to have a much tighter tension and the whole thing's going to jam up. We'll set our row counter to 0, and we're going to do, I don't know, we'll do 40 rows for the foot.